The stars trembled when Yokan warships appeared in their systems. Across the galaxy, every species knew the terrible truth about these monsters from the planet Korath. They were 8 feet tall with scales harder than battle armor. Their claws could slice through metal like paper. Their acid breath could melt through ship hulls in seconds. Most terrifying of all was their strength, which could crush bones with a simple squeeze of their massive hands. Captain Desu stood on the command bridge of his dreadnought Bloodfang, watching another world burn below. The planet had refused to pay tribute to the Yokan Empire, so now its cities were nothing but smoking ruins. His warriors had made quick work of the local defenders. The species living there had put up no real fight at all. They never did any more. For 3,000 years, the Yokan Empire had ruled the galaxy without challenge. Every race that tried to resist was destroyed or enslaved. Every world that refused to bow was turned to ash. The empire stretched across 10,000 star systems and controlled the lives of billions of creatures, all because the Yokan were born on the most dangerous world anyone had ever discovered. Korath was a nightmare. Planet that would kill most species in minutes. The gravity was twice what most creatures could survive. The air was filled with toxic gases that burned lungs and melted flesh. Rivers of molten rock flowed across the surface while acid rain fell from blood-red skies. Massive storms with winds that could flatten mountains raged for months at a time. Volcanic eruptions happened so often that the ground never stopped shaking. Only the strongest Yokan children survived to adulthood on such a hellish world. Those who lived grew up to become perfect killing machines. Their bodies adapted to withstand heat that would cook other creatures alive. Their lungs filtered poison from the air like it was nothing. Their muscles grew dense and powerful from fighting the crushing gravity every day of their lives. The young Yokan learned to hunt the most dangerous predators on their homeworld. Massive beasts with razor teeth and armor plating roamed the wastelands of Korath. Flying monsters with wings like knives swooped down from the toxic clouds above. Underground dwellers with acid for blood tunneled through solid rock to attack their prey. Yet Yokan warriors killed them all with their bare hands and turned their remains into weapons and armor. When the Yokan first discovered space travel, they expected to find worthy opponents among the stars. Instead, they found worlds full of weak, soft creatures who had never faced real danger. These pathetic beings lived on garden worlds with gentle weather and breathable air. They had never learned to fight for survival because their planets had never tried to kill them. They were nothing but prey animals waiting to be hunted. The first species the Yokan encountered tried to negotiate and make peace treaties. They offered trade agreements and cultural exchanges. They spoke of cooperation and mutual benefit. The Yokan response was simple and direct. They killed the negotiators and enslaved the rest of the species within a year. This pattern repeated itself. Across the galaxy as the Empire expanded, some races tried to fight back with advanced technology and powerful weapons. They built massive fleets and trained professional armies. They created energy shields and particle beams that could destroy entire moons. None of it mattered when faced with creatures who had been forged in the fires of the most hostile world. In known space, Yokan warriors ripped through their defenses like they were made of paper. The galactic community learned to fear the sound of Yokan war drums. When those deep pounding rhythms echoed through space, it meant death was coming. Entire civilizations would abandon their homeworlds rather than face the Empire's wrath. Others would surrender immediately and beg for mercy that rarely came. The smart ones paid tribute without being asked and hoped the Yokan would leave them alone. Desu remembered his first battle as a young warrior 20 cycles ago. He had been nervous about fighting aliens who might have strange abilities or advanced technology. His commander had laughed and told him that no species in the galaxy could match the fury of Korath's children. The old warrior had been right. Every battle since then had been a massacre rather than a real fight. The captain looked around his bridge at his crew of elite Yokan warriors. Each one had survived the trials of their homeworld and earned their place through strength and cunning. They wore the scars of 1,000 battles and the fangs of their greatest kills. Their weapons were made from the bones of creatures that had ruled Korath before the Yilkin conquered them. They were the finest soldiers the galaxy had ever produced. Outside the viewing ports, Desu could see the other ships of his battle fleet. 50 vessels of war carrying 10,000 of the Empire's most deadly warriors. Each ship was a masterpiece of destruction built to bring death to the enemies of the Yilkin. Their hulls were forged from metals found only in the molten heart of Korath. Their weapons fired concentrated death that could crack planets open. Like eggs. The communication console chirped with an incoming message from the High Command back on Korath. Desu activated the holographic display and watched as the image of Supreme General Gorath appeared before him. The ancient warrior was covered in battle scars from centuries of conquest. His eyes burned with the same fire that had driven the Yilkin to rule the galaxy. The general's message was brief and to the point. A new species had appeared on the outer rim of Yilkin space. They called themselves humans and came from a small blue world named Earth. Intelligence reports suggested they were weak creatures with soft skin and no natural weapons. Yet somehow they had begun establishing colonies in territory that belonged to the Empire. This was an insult that could not be tolerated. No species had dared to enter Yilkin space without permission for over 1,000 years. These humans needed to be taught the same lesson that every other race had learned. They would be crushed completely and their remains displayed as a warning to others who might think of defying the Empire. Desu smiled as he received his orders. He was to take his battle fleet to human space and destroy everything he found there. No prisoners were to be taken. No mercy was to be shown. The humans would learn why the Yilkin were the apex predators of the galaxy. The captain gave orders to his navigation officer to set course for the human frontier. His weapons master began preparing the ship's guns for another glorious battle. The crew sang ancient war songs from Korath as they prepared to add another species to their long list of conquests. None of them suspected that they were about to encounter something that would change the galaxy forever. The humans they dismissed as weak prey were about to show them what a real Deathworld species looked like when it stopped holding back. The colony ship New Soul drifted peacefully through the darkness between stars carrying 5,000 human settlers to their new home. Captain Jingwu stood on the bridge watching the empty void ahead while his crew ran final checks on their systems. They were only 3 days away from the planet they would call New Bizan, a world with clean air and fertile soil perfect for human settlement. Chief Engineer Borum was deep in the engine compartments making sure everything ran smoothly for their arrival. She had spent 2 years preparing this ship for the long journey from Earth. Every system had been tested and retested. Every component had been built to last for decades of hard use. The colonists were depending on her to get them safely to their new home. In the passenger sections, families prepared for planetfall. Children pressed their faces against viewing ports trying to catch glimpses of their destination star. Adults checked and rechecked their personal belongings, making sure nothing important had been lost during the long voyage. Everyone was excited about starting fresh lives on a new world far from the crowded cities of Earth. The ship carried no military weapons because humans had never encountered hostile aliens before. Their deep space surveys had found many worlds with simple life but no signs of intelligent species. The galaxy seemed empty and peaceful. The worst dangers they expected were equipment failures or natural disasters. No one imagined that predators might be hunting them through the darkness of space. The first sign of trouble came when sensor operator Kyungsu detected unknown ships approaching from multiple directions. The vessels were large and moved with purpose, like warships closing in for an attack. Captain Jinwoo tried opening communication channels, broadcasting standard peaceful greeting messages in every language Earth had developed for first contact with alien species. The response was immediate and terrifying. Plasma cannons opened fire without warning, turning sections of the New Soul into twisted wreckage. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the ship as hull breaches vented atmosphere into space. The lights flickered and went out in damaged areas. While backup systems struggled to keep people alive, Desu watched from his command chair as his warriors attacked the human vessel. The ship was even more primitive than intelligence reports had suggested. Its hull was made of simple metals that melted under Yoken plasma fire. Its weapons were nothing but industrial tools never meant for combat. This would be over in minutes. Just like every other battle he had ever fought, but something strange began happening aboard the human ship. Instead of surrendering or trying to flee, the soft-skinned creatures started fighting back with whatever they could find. Mining lasers, meant for cutting asteroids, became deadly weapons slicing through Yoken armor. Construction mechs designed for building colonies turned into war machines wielding plasma cutters and industrial hammers. Engineer Hyunwoo ran through burning corridors while jury-rigging explosive charges from mining equipment. He had never been a soldier, but his training at the Seoul Technical Institute had taught him how different chemicals reacted under pressure. The bombs he built from fertilizer and fuel were crude but effective. They punched holes through Yoken boarding craft and sent the warriors inside tumbling into space. Medical Officer Yunji found herself treating wounded colonists in a damaged hospital bay when Yoken warriors broke through the hull. She had studied alien anatomy in school, never expecting to use that knowledge in combat. But she knew exactly where to aim her surgical laser to cause maximum damage to the attacking creatures. Her precise cuts severed tendons and arteries, dropping the massive aliens before they could hurt her patients. The battle raged for hours as Yoken boarding parties tried to capture the human ship. They expected to face terrified civilians who would surrender at the first sight of their claws and fangs. Instead, they found humans who fought with desperate creativity, turning every tool and piece of equipment into weapons. Maintenance worker Minho trapped a squad of warriors in an airlock and vented them into space. Teacher Sora used her chemistry knowledge to create poisonous gas clouds that forced the invaders to retreat. What shocked the Yoken most was how the humans reacted to injury and death. When other species saw blood and bodies, they usually panicked and ran away. But these strange creatures seemed to become more dangerous when their friends were hurt. They fought harder when the situation looked hopeless. They never gave up even. When victory seemed impossible, Desu stared at his tactical displays in growing disbelief. Half of his boarding parties had been killed or wounded by civilians with mining tools. His elite warriors were being outfought by creatures who had never seen combat before today. These humans were not behaving like any species he had ever encountered. They were acting like Yoken warriors defending their own homeworld. The turning point came when the human colonists realized the aliens were trying to capture their ship rather than destroy it. Captain Jinwoo made a decision that would have seemed insane to any other species. He ordered his crew to overload the main reactor and turn their colony ship into a massive bomb. If the Yoken wanted the new Seoul, they could have it along with enough nuclear fire to vaporize half their fleet. Engineer Borum raced through damaged corridors to reach the engine room while Yoken warriors hunted her through the ship. She had never expected to die in combat, but she would not let these monsters capture thousands of human families. Her hands flew over control panels, pushing the reactor past every safety limit as plasma fire melted the walls around her. Desu realized what the humans were planning just in time to order his fleet to retreat. The colony ship exploded in a ball of nuclear fire that lit up the darkness between stars. The blast caught two of his destroyers that were too close and turned them into glowing debris. The remaining humans had chosen death over surrender-taking. As many Yoken with them as they could as the Bloodfang limped away from the battle, Desu tried to understand what had just happened. He had attacked what should have been helpless prey and instead found warriors as fierce as any he had ever faced. These humans had fought with a fury that matched the greatest Yoken legends. They had died rather than submit to conquest. For the first time in his long career, Captain Desu began to wonder if the intelligence reports about this new species might have been very wrong. The creatures he had just fought were not weak prey. Animals. They were something else entirely, and the thought of facing more of them made even a veteran Yoken warrior feel a chill of fear. The news of the new Sol's destruction reached Earth faster than light itself through quantum communication arrays. Admiral Tae-yun stood in the command center of Fleet Headquarters reading the final messages from Captain Junwoo and his crew. The transmission was crackling with static from battle damage, but the words came through clearly enough. Hostile aliens had attacked human civilians without warning or provocation. The last message was from Engineer Borum, just moments before the ship's reactor overloaded. Her voice was calm despite the plasma fire and screaming alarms in the background. She reported that the aliens were trying to capture rather than destroy their ship. She also noted that the creatures seemed surprised by human resistance. They had expected easy prey and found warriors instead. Within hours, every human military commander in the solar system had gathered for an emergency meeting. General Wansik represented the ground forces while Admiral Tae-yun spoke for the Navy. Intelligence Director Sahi presented what little information they had about the attackers. The enemy called themselves Yilkin and came from a world even more dangerous than the worst places on Earth. The debate was short and decisive. These aliens had murdered 5,000 innocent colonists, including women and children. They had shown no interest in communication or negotiation. Their actions suggested they viewed humans as nothing more than animals to be slaughtered or enslaved. There could be only one response to such unprovoked aggression. Earth's military had been preparing for interstellar conflict ever since humans first reached the stars. They knew that peaceful species were rare in any ecosystem. Most life forms competed aggressively for resources and territory. The galaxy was probably full of predators looking for new hunting grounds. Now they had found one. The human fleet that assembled in Earth orbit was impressive by any standard. 50 heavy cruisers armed with nuclear missiles and particle beam weapons, 100 destroyers built for speed and maneuverability, 200 fighter craft piloted by the best graduates from military academies around the world. Each ship carried warriors trained since childhood in the arts of war, but the most dangerous weapon in the human arsenal was not any piece of technology. It was the crews themselves and the planet that had forged them over millions of years of evolutionary warfare. Earth had created a species that simply refused to quit fighting no matter how bad the odds became. The Yilkin were about to learn this lesson in the most painful way possible. Commander Naeong led the first squadron of fighters to jump into Yilkin space. Her pilots were volunteers who had grown up hearing stories about Earth's ancient warriors. They knew about the soldiers who had fought at Thermopylae and Stalingrad. They understood what it meant to hold the line against impossible odds. Each one was ready to die if necessary to protect humanity from alien predators. The human battle fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Korath system expecting to face overwhelming enemy forces. Instead, they found Yilkin ships scattered and disorganized as if the aliens had not expected retaliation. The Empire had grown so used to fighting weak prey that they had forgotten how to face real predators. This would be their first and last mistake. Admiral Tae-yun gave the order to attack, and 40,000 years of human evolution screamed for blood. Fighter squadrons dove at Yilkin destroyers like hunting wolves, bringing down massive prey. The alien ships were larger and more heavily armed, but human pilots flew with reckless courage that bordered on madness. They used ramming attacks when their weapons ran out. They turned their craft into guided missiles when all hope seemed lost. The space battle raged for 6 hours as human and Yilkin forces clashed across the outer system. The aliens had superior technology and more experience, but they had never faced an enemy that fought like cornered animals. Human crews kept fighting with hull breaches venting atmosphere. They continued combat operations with half their systems destroyed. They never considered retreat or surrender as viable options. Captain Kyung-hee commanded the heavy cruiser Incheon when Yilkin plasma fire destroyed her main engines and killed half her crew. Standard military doctrine called for withdrawal in such circumstances. Instead, she ordered her remaining weapons to target the alien flagship's reactor core. Her ship was dying, but she would take the enemy commander with her. Into the void, on the ground, human marines prepared for planetary assault against a world that killed most life forms within minutes. Korath's toxic atmosphere and crushing gravity would have stopped any other species cold. But human engineers had studied the planet for months, developing equipment specifically designed to operate in such hellish conditions. They were going to bring the war directly to the Yokan homeworld. Sergeant Jihoon led the first assault wave onto Korath's surface, wearing armor that weighed twice what any normal human could carry. The environmental suit was a masterpiece of engineering designed to keep a person alive in conditions that would melt most metals. It filtered deadly gases from the air and provided radiation. Shielding from the planet's unstable core, the landing zones were under constant bombardment from Yokan ground forces, but human marines advanced anyway through molten rock flows and acid storms. They had trained in the volcanic regions of Earth, where conditions were almost as bad as Korath. The alien homeworld was dangerous, but it was not worse than some of the places humans had learned to survive. Corporal Hiram found herself separated from her unit during the initial assault when a lava flow cut off her retreat route. She was alone on the most hostile planet in the galaxy, with limited oxygen and Yokan warriors hunting her through the toxic wasteland. Any rational creature would have hidden and waited for rescue. Instead, she began stalking the aliens through their own backyard. The Yokan defenders fought desperately to protect their sacred world, but they discovered something terrifying about humans in ground combat. The worse the situation became, the more dangerous these creatures got. Pain that would incapacitate most species only made humans angry. Wounds that should have been fatal barely slowed them down. They seemed to thrive on the very adversity that broke other races. Private Sung-Ho crawled through superheated tunnels that would have killed any other life form to plant explosives under a Yokan command center. His armor was melting and his oxygen supply was running critically low, but he still managed to complete his mission. The blast brought down an entire fortress complex and opened a gap in the alien defensive lines. As reports came in from across Korath, Admiral Taeyun realized that something unprecedented was happening. Human forces were not just surviving on the galaxy's most dangerous world, they were winning battles against its native defenders. The species that had seemed like weak prey was proving to be the most formidable enemy the Yokan Empire had ever faced. The war would continue for months, but the outcome was already decided. Humanity had found its place among the stars, and that place was at the top of the food chain. The galaxy's former apex predators were about to become the hunted instead of the hunters. Dr. Kwangsu stood in his laboratory on Korath, staring at the impossible data displayed on his screens. As the Yokan Empire's chief xenobiologist, he had studied hundreds of alien species over his long career. He thought he understood the fundamental principles that governed life in the galaxy. The human prisoners had shattered every assumption he had ever made about evolution and survival. The first shock came when he analyzed human physiology. These creatures came from a world with lighter gravity than most inhabited planets, yet they possessed incredible bone density and muscle strength. Their cardiovascular systems were designed to function under massive stress loads. Their nervous systems processed pain signals in ways that allowed them to continue fighting, despite injuries that would cripple any other species. Even more disturbing was human brain chemistry. Their minds produced cocktails of hormones and neurotransmitters that would be considered toxic in most life forms. Under stress, these chemicals flooded their systems, turning fear into fury and pain into determination. It was as if their entire species had evolved to become more dangerous when faced with mortal peril. The captured human equipment told an equally shocking story. Their tools were crude compared to Yokan technology, but they were built to function under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Human armor could withstand temperatures that would melt steel. Their weapons were designed to keep firing even when half destroyed. Everything they built reflected a species that expected to fight for survival in the worst possible circumstances. Prisoner interrogations revealed the true horror of the world called Earth. Wanchik had been a maintenance worker on the New Sol, but his knowledge of human history was extensive. He spoke calmly about his homeworld's past, as if describing a normal childhood rather than a nightmare that had lasted millions of years. Every word made Dr. Kwang Su understand why the Yilkin were losing this war. Earth had experienced 5 major mass extinctions that killed most life on the planet. Ice ages had locked the world in frozen death for millions of years at a time. Volcanic supereruptions had blocked out the sun and poisoned the atmosphere. Asteroid impacts had turned continents into smoking craters. Yet somehow life had not only survived but grown stronger after each catastrophe. The planet's biology was a constant war zone, where every creature fought desperately for survival. Plants evolved to produce toxins that could kill most galactic species instantly. Bacteria developed specifically to cause disease and death. Animals created every possible method of hunting, trapping, and consuming each other. Nothing lived peacefully. On Earth, because peace meant extinction, humans had not just survived in this hellish environment, they had conquered it completely. They had learned to use fire when they were still primitive apes, barely different from other animals. They had domesticated the very predators that once hunted them through ancient forests. They had turned Earth's hostile climate into their greatest advantage. By adapting to thrive in any environment, the prisoner explained how humans had spread across every continent on their homeworld. They lived in frozen wastelands where the air itself could freeze flesh solid. They built cities and deserts where the sun could cook most creatures alive in minutes. They sailed oceans filled with monsters that could swallow ships whole. They climbed mountains where the thin air would suffocate most species. Most shocking of all was how humans had learned to fight each other. For thousands of years, they had waged constant warfare using increasingly deadly weapons and tactics. They had developed military strategies that maximized casualties and destruction. They had created technologies specifically designed to kill other humans as efficiently as possible. War was not just something they did, it was something they had perfected. Dr. Kwang Su began to understand why human prisoners showed no fear when threatened with torture or death. These creatures had evolved on a world where suffering was normal and extinction was always one mistake away. They had developed psychological defenses that allowed them to function under stress that would drive most species insane. Pain and fear were just more challenges to overcome. The xenobiologist research team discovered that humans possessed redundant organ systems that allowed them to survive injuries that would be instantly fatal to other life forms. Their blood could clot rapidly to prevent death from wounds. Their bones could heal stronger than before after being broken. Their immune systems could adapt to fight diseases that had never existed before. Even human reproduction reflected their Deathworld origins. Their young were born helpless and required years of care to reach maturity. This seemed like a disadvantage until Dr. Kwang Su realized that the long childhood allowed for extensive learning and adaptation. Young humans absorbed survival skills and combat techniques that would serve them throughout their lives. They were trained from birth to be warriors. The final piece of the puzzle came when the research team analyzed human genetic material. Their DNA contained backup systems and error correction mechanisms that prevented mutations from destroying the species. They could adapt to new environments within a few generations. They had built in advantages that allowed them to survive changes that would wipe out more specialized creatures. As Dr. Kwang Su compiled his final report, he realized the terrible truth about humanity's place in the galaxy. They were not just another species competing for resources. They were the ultimate product of the most dangerous world evolution had ever created. Every human was a living weapon forged in the fires of constant warfare and environmental catastrophe. The Yilkin had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years because they came from a harsh world that created powerful warriors. But Korath was a garden paradise compared to Earth. The humans were not just another apex predator species. They were something beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. They were Deathworlders who had evolved beyond the normal limits of what living things could endure. The Empire's greatest scientists had discovered why their mighty warriors were falling to these seemingly weak creatures. The humans were not weak at all. They were the most dangerous life forms the universe had ever produced, and they were just getting started with their conquest of the stars. The assault on Korath began at dawn when the first wave of human dropships pierced the planet's toxic atmosphere. General Sunho watched from the command center of his flagship as thousands of his warriors descended toward the Yokan homeworld. Like falling stars, each soldier wore armor specifically designed to function in conditions that would kill most galactic species within minutes. The landing was opposed by every defensive system the Yokan could bring to bear. Anti-aircraft weapons fired streams of plasma into the sky, trying to destroy the human transports before they could reach the surface. Fighter squadrons rose from hidden bases to intercept the invasion force. The very air seemed to burn as the battle raged through Korath's poisonous clouds, but the humans kept coming despite horrific losses. When dropships were destroyed, the soldiers inside continued their descent using emergency parachutes and personal jump jets. When those failed, they used their armor's built-in thrusters to control their fall. Many died in the landing, but enough survived to establish beachheads on the most dangerous world in the galaxy. The Yokan defenders had prepared for this battle their entire lives. They knew every cave and lava tube on their homeworld. They had weapons designed specifically for fighting in Korath's hellish environment. They possessed every advantage that terrain technology and numbers could provide. Yet somehow the human invaders continued to advance through conditions that should have stopped any attack cold. Private Youngsu found himself separated from his unit when a lava flow destroyed the bridge his squad was crossing. He was alone on an alien world with failing life support systems and enemies hunting him through the toxic wasteland. Most soldiers would have tried to hide and wait for rescue. Instead, he began stalking Yokan patrols through their own territory. Using skills he had learned in Earth's volcanic regions, the human soldier moved through superheated gases that would have cooked most creatures alive. His armor was designed to operate in temperatures that could melt steel, but even those systems were being pushed beyond their limits. The outer layers of his suit began to break down under the constant assault of acid rain and molten debris. Yet he pressed forward deeper into enemy territory. Youngsu reached his objective. Just as his oxygen supply hit critical levels, the Yokan ammunition depot was hidden inside a natural cave system that provided protection from Korath's hostile environment. Getting inside required crawling through passages filled with toxic gases and superheated rock. Any rational being would have turned back, but humans had long ago evolved beyond rational survival instincts. The explosion that destroyed the depot could be seen from orbit as a pillar of fire that rose above Korath's blood-red clouds. The blast took out 6 square kilometers of enemy defensive positions and opened a gap in their lines that human forces immediately exploited. One soldier with a handful of explosives had accomplished what an entire brigade might have struggled to achieve. Lieutenant Jiyoung led her platoon through acid storms that ate through their equipment like water-dissolving sugar. The atmospheric conditions on Korath were beyond anything in the human experience, yet her soldiers adapted with the same determination their ancestors had shown when facing ice ages and volcanic winters on Earth. They wrapped their weapons in protective covers and kept advancing. The Yokan defenders fought with the fury of creatures protecting their most sacred ground. They used every weapon in their arsenal and employed tactics perfected over millennia of conquest. Their warriors were among the finest soldiers the galaxy had ever produced. None of it mattered when faced with humans who simply refused to accept defeat under any circumstances. Sergeant Minju discovered that her squad's communication equipment had been destroyed by the corrosive atmosphere. They were cut off from command and surrounded by enemies in an environment that was actively trying to kill them. Standard military doctrine called for withdrawal to a safer position. Instead, she led her soldiers forward toward the sound of the heaviest fighting. The human soldiers moved through Korath's wasteland like ghosts, materializing from the toxic mists to strike at Yokan positions before vanishing again. They used the planet's own hostile environment as a weapon, turning lava flows into barriers and acid pools into traps. The defenders found themselves being hunted on their own world by creatures who seemed to thrive in conditions that should have killed them. Captain Desu watched the battle reports with growing horror from his command bunker deep beneath Korath's surface. His finest warriors were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that should not have been able to survive 5 minutes on his homeworld. These humans were fighting in ways that defied everything he thought he knew about warfare and survival. The turning point came when human engineers managed to breach the primary defensive wall protecting the capital city. The barrier had stood for over 1,000 years and had never been seriously threatened by any enemy force. It was built from the hardest materials found on Korath and was designed to withstand from orbital bombardment weapons. The humans did not try to destroy the wall with conventional weapons. Instead, they used Korath's own geology against the defenders. Human demolition experts planted charges at key points where the wall intersected with underground lava tubes. The explosions redirected molten rock flows that had been flowing beneath the city for centuries. The results were catastrophic for the Yokan defenders. Sections of the wall simply melted away as rivers of superheated stone poured through the defensive positions. Ancient buildings that had survived every war in Yokan history were consumed by fires that burned hotter than plasma weapons. The capital city that had never fallen to any enemy was being destroyed by the very planet it was built upon. General Sunho led the final assault through the burning streets while his soldiers fought house-to-house battles with the desperate defenders. The Yokan warriors fought with all the skill and fury their species was famous for, but they were being overwhelmed by enemies who seemed to get stronger as the battle became more hopeless. Every human casualty only made the survivors fight harder. The battle for the Imperial Palace lasted 3 days and became the stuff of legend. Yokan guards made their final stand in halls where their ancestors had planned the conquest of the galaxy. They used every weapon and defensive advantage their fortress could provide. They died fighting rather than surrendered to the creatures they had once dismissed as weak prey animals. When the smoke finally cleared, human flags flew over the ruins of the Yokan capital. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years had been brought to its knees by a species most aliens had never heard of just months before. The apex predators had been proven to be nothing more than another link in a food chain that humans now topped across Yokan space. Subject species watched in amazement as their oppressors fled from advancing human forces. Planets that had paid tribute for generations declared independence. Slave races took up arms against their former masters. The mighty empire began crumbling as its foundation of fear was destroyed by creatures from a small blue world. The few surviving Yokan leaders gathered in hidden bunkers trying to understand how their civilization had collapsed so quickly. They had possessed every advantage that superior technology and military experience could provide. Their warriors had been the finest soldiers in the galaxy. Their worlds had been considered unconquerable by any enemy force, yet somehow humans had done the impossible. They had invaded the most dangerous planet in known space and defeated its native defenders on their own ground. They had turned Korath's hostile environment into their ally and used it to destroy fortifications that had stood for millennia. They had proven that there were predators in the galaxy far more dangerous than anything the Yokan had ever imagined. The war was effectively over, though scattered fighting would continue for months. The Yokan Empire had learned the hard way that they were not the galaxy's apex Deathworlders. That title belonged to humanity, and they had claimed it with the blood of their enemies spilled on the most hostile battlefield in the known universe. 6 months after the fall of Korath, Captain Desu found himself sitting across from Admiral Taeyun in a neutral space station orbiting a dead world between human and Yokan territories. The proud warrior who had once commanded the most feared warship in the galaxy now looked like a broken shell of his former self. The humans had not just defeated his people, they had shattered everything he thought he understood about strength and survival. The peace negotiations had taken months of careful diplomacy as both sides tried to find common ground after such a brutal conflict. The Yokan leadership that remained wanted guarantees that their species would not be exterminated. The human. Negotiators demanded reparations for the colonists killed in the initial attack. Neither side trusted the other, but both recognized that continued warfare would only bring more suffering. Admiral Taeyun studied his former enemy with something approaching respect. The Yokan captain had fought bravely throughout the war, even when it became obvious that his side was losing. He had never surrendered despite facing impossible odds. He had shown the kind of courage that humans recognized and admired even in their enemies. The galaxy had changed dramatically since news of humanity's victory spread across the known worlds. Species that had lived in terror of the Yokan Empire for generations now looked to Earth as their protector. Trade delegations and diplomatic missions flooded human space-seeking alliances and partnerships. The balance of power that had remained stable for millennia had shifted overnight, but humans proved to be very different conquerors than the Yokan had ever been. Instead of demanding tribute and slaves, they offered trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Human scientists shared medical knowledge that helped cure diseases which had plagued other species for centuries. Human engineers provided solutions to problems that had stumped galactic civilization for thousands of years. Dr. Insu headed the new Xenological Research Institute established on Earth to study the incredible diversity of alien life. Her work had revealed fascinating insights about what made different species successful in the harsh environment of space. She discovered that humans possessed a unique combination of adaptability and determination that set them apart from every other race in the galaxy. Most species evolved on worlds that taught them to avoid danger and seek safety. They developed instincts that prioritized survival over conquest. When faced with overwhelming threats, they either fled or submitted rather than fight to the death. This made perfect sense from an evolutionary standpoint, but it also made them vulnerable to more aggressive predators. Humans had evolved on a world that punished weakness and rewarded those who fought back against impossible odds. Earth had created a species that became more dangerous when cornered rather than more cautious. They possessed psychological traits that other races found incomprehensible and terrifying. Fear made them angry rather than cautious. Pain made them determined rather than defeated. The peace treaty signed between humanity and the remaining Yokan territories reflected this new understanding. The agreement established trade relationships and cultural exchanges rather than the traditional conqueror and conquered dynamic. Both species would benefit from cooperation rather than continued warfare. It was a revolutionary concept in galactic politics. Captain Desu found himself grudgingly admiring the humans who had defeated his empire. These creatures possessed something that Yokan society had never understood. They could turn enemies into allies and find strength through cooperation rather than domination. Even their methods of warfare showed a preference for decisive action over prolonged suffering. The former Yokan captain had spent months studying human history and culture, trying to understand how such seemingly weak creatures had become so formidable. What he discovered challenged everything his species believed about strength and survival. Humans had not conquered their homeworld through individual prowess, but through collective effort and shared sacrifice. Earth's most dangerous predators had been defeated not by stronger individual humans, but by groups working together with tools and tactics. Human civilization had advanced through cooperation and knowledge sharing, rather than the strongest individuals dominating the weak. They had created technologies that made their entire species more capable rather than just benefiting elite warriors. This approach to survival and advancement had created something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that became exponentially more dangerous when working together rather than competing against each other. Individual humans might not match individual Yokan in raw physical power, but human groups could accomplish things that no other species had ever achieved. The establishment of the Galactic Cooperative Council marked the beginning of a new era in interstellar relations. Representatives from dozens of species gathered on Earth to discuss trade agreements, scientific exchanges, and mutual defense treaties. The age of empires ruling through fear and intimidation was coming to an end. Admiral Tae-yun addressed the assembled delegates in the Great Hall built specifically for these historic meetings. He spoke about humanity's vision for the galaxy where different species could work together for mutual benefit rather than fighting over limited resources. It was an ambitious dream, but one that seemed achievable given what humans had already accomplished. The Yokan delegation led by Captain Desu formally acknowledged humanity's role as protector of the weaker species that had suffered under their empire's rule. It was a humbling moment for a proud warrior culture, but also the beginning of something better. The former predators were learning that there was more than one way to be strong in the galaxy. As ships from dozens of worlds gathered in Earth's orbital shipyards to begin joint construction projects, one thing became clear to every observer. The humans had not conquered the galaxy through superior weapons or advanced technology. They had won through something far more powerful and sustainable than military might. They possessed the unbreakable spirit of a species that had learned to survive and thrive in the face of any challenge their hostile world could present. They had turned every setback into a learning experience and every defeat into motivation for future victory. Most importantly, they had learned that true strength came not from dominating others, but from lifting everyone up together. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of apex predators ruling through fear was over. The age of cooperation and shared prosperity had begun, and humanity stood ready to lead by example rather than force. They had proven that there was always a bigger predator somewhere in the universe, and sometimes that predator was willing to protect rather than consume those weaker than itself. Chat controls. Sonnet 4.